Hello folks. Before we start, don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more such spine-chilling stories. Let's try to reach 100 subscribers. Thank you. Now let's begin. It was the kind of deal you didn't question. A once-in-a-lifetime offer that almost felt like a trick. My girlfriend, Lily, and I were scrolling through real estate listings late one night. Not seriously looking, but dreaming of a place we could call our own. We didn't have much money, and the thought of owning a home was far off. But then we saw it. A house. A big one. Old, yes, but beautifully constructed, with the kind of character you just don't find in newer homes. It had 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and a porch that wrapped all the way around. And it was going for less than half of what any other property in the area was listed for. "Look at this," I had said, showing Lily the listing. "Can this be right?" Lily's eyes widened as she scrolled through the pictures. How is it so cheap? That was the question, wasn't it? I felt a twinge of unease, but we were both too excited to care. We called the next morning, half expecting the house to already be off the market. But no, it was still available. The realtor was eager to meet us, almost too eager. When we pulled up to the house a few days later, it looked even better in person. It stood at the edge of Winter Ridge, the last house before the woods swallowed up the road, the kind of secluded place where you could hear your own footsteps echoing in the quiet. It was a gray autumn day, the sky overcast and the wind biting, but the house itself looked inviting, maybe even a little too perfect, like something out of a dream that you couldn't quite remember. "This is it," Lily said, her voice full of hope. "I can feel it." I wanted to believe her, but as we approached the porch, a strange chill crept up my spine, one that had nothing to do with the cold wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was off. The realtor, a woman in her 50s with a bright smile and tired eyes, met us at the door. "Welcome," she said, shaking our hands a little too enthusiastically. "You won't find a better deal anywhere in town. It's a real gem." Lily was already sold. As we toured the house, she was practically bouncing on her toes, her eyes alight with excitement. The inside was just as charming as the photos had shown. Tall ceilings, original woodwork, and an old brick fireplace in the living room that I could already imagine us sitting by during the winter. But as we moved through the rooms, that strange feeling of unease only grew stronger. It was subtle at first, just a creeping sense that we weren't supposed to be here, that the house didn't want us. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin it for Lily, but every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, felt like a warning. Finally, we reached the upstairs hallway, where 3 bedrooms lined the corridor. The air felt heavier here, the walls narrower than they should have been. The realtor gestured for us to follow her into the master bedroom. But, as I passed by the second door on the left, something caught my eye. The door was cracked open, just slightly, and through the gap, I could see a sliver of the room beyond. But it was the dark shadow standing just inside that froze me in place. I blinked, trying to focus, but whatever I had seen was gone, as if it had melted into the dim light. My heart thudded in my chest, and for a second, I thought about asking Lily if she had seen it too, but she was already in the master bedroom, marveling at the size of the closet. The realtor must have noticed me staring. "That room was used for storage by the last owner," she said, her voice oddly quiet. "They didn't spend much time in there." I swallowed hard. "Why not?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "People always ask about that room. I wouldn't worry. Every house has its quirks." Quirks. That word bounced around in my mind like an echo as we finished the tour and stepped outside. Lily was buzzing with excitement, already talking about paint colors and furniture arrangements. But my mind was still back in that hallway, back with whatever I thought I had seen through that crack in the door. We left Winter Ridge with a contract in hand. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just nerves. Buying a house was a big step after all, but something lingered. As we drove back toward the city, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the trees. The realtor had mentioned something about an old rumor, but I hadn't paid attention at the time. Now, I wished I had asked her to tell me more. It didn't take long for everything to fall into place. Within a month, the paperwork was signed, and the house was ours. The price was so low that we barely needed a loan to cover it, and within days of the sale, we were moving in. It all felt like a blur. One moment we were daydreaming about owning a home, and the next, we were driving boxes up to Winter Ridge in the back of Lily's car. The air felt crisper in the hills, colder than it had been in the city. It was as if the chill clung to the house, no matter how much sunlight touched it. But Lily was happy, and that made me happy. She spent the first day buzzing around the house, cleaning, unpacking, hanging up decorations, and talking about how perfect everything was. I tried to share in her excitement, but something still didn't sit right with me. I couldn't stop thinking about that room. The second door on the left upstairs, the one with the cracked door and the shadow I'd glimpsed on our first visit. We hadn't gone inside yet. Lily had simply walked past it as if it didn't exist. I asked her about it once, casually, but she shrugged it off. "It's just a guest room," she had said. "We'll deal with it when we get to it." But that room, it was like it was waiting for us. Night fell quickly, the temperature dropping as the last rays of light disappeared behind the trees. The house grew dark, the old windows letting in only slivers of moonlight, and the wind began to howl through the trees, rattling the porch like a warning. We made a small dinner, then curled up on the couch in front of the fireplace. Lily was smiling, lost in the warmth and comfort of the moment, but I couldn't relax. I kept glancing toward the stairs, my stomach twisting with a feeling I couldn't explain. "Hey," she said, nudging me with her elbow. "You all right? You've been quiet all night." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just still settling in, I guess." "You're not worried about the house, are you?" she asked, her tone playful. "I mean, it's not haunted or anything." I laughed, but the sound came out hollow. "Of course not. Just new place, you know. Takes some getting used to." Lily smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "We're going to be fine. This is the start of something amazing. You'll see." I nodded, trying to shake off the feeling. But that night, after Lily went to bed, I stayed up for a while longer, sitting by the fire and staring at the dark hallway that led to the stairs. The house was quiet now, but it was a kind of silence that felt alive. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of wind against the windows felt like something more, something watching. Eventually, I forced myself to go upstairs. The second floor was colder, and the air felt stagnant, as if it had been trapped there for years. I walked past the second door on the left, trying not to look at it, but the moment I passed, I felt that same chill from before. There was a subtle shift in the air, a heaviness that seemed to pull at my skin. I glanced at the door, and once again, it was cracked open, just slightly, like it had been waiting for me. I stopped, staring at the sliver of darkness beyond the door. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I thought about reaching for the handle, about opening it and facing whatever was inside, but my hand wouldn't move. Something, some primal instinct, held me back, screaming at me to leave it alone. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of unease, and hurried to the bedroom where Lily was already asleep, curled up under the blankets. The warmth of her presence eased the tension in my chest, and I slipped into bed beside her, pulling the covers over my head like a child afraid of the dark. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay there for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of the house, of that room, of the feeling that had gripped me the moment we stepped inside. The wind howled outside, but it was the sound within the house that kept me awake. The faint creaking of the floorboards, the distant groan of the walls, like the house was alive, shifting around us as we slept. Sometime after midnight, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. A soft, deliberate sound. Footsteps. My eyes snapped open and my heart pounded in my chest. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Someone or something was walking down the upstairs hallway. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the house had gone silent again. I told myself it was nothing, just the old floorboards settling, but deep down, I knew better. I rolled over, careful not to wake Lily, and stared at the door to our bedroom. It was closed, but beyond it, I could feel the presence of that hallway, stretching out in the dark, leading to the room with the cracked door. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, soft but steady, moving closer. My pulse quickened, and I sat up, my hand trembling as I reached for the bedside lamp. But before I could turn it on, the footsteps stopped, right outside our door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the house was just old and creaky. Maybe I was imagining it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was out there. I stayed perfectly still, listening, waiting. The seconds stretched on, each one heavier than the last. But then, just as I was about to get out of bed and check the hallway, I heard the softest sound. A whisper, barely more than a breath, but unmistakable. "Come see." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice had come from the hallway, right outside the door. It was faint, distant, but it was real, and it was waiting. The whisper echoed in my mind, the words repeating over and over until they blurred into a single, haunting command. "Come see." I lay there, frozen, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst from my chest. I wanted to wake Lily, to tell her what I'd heard, but something kept me silent. It felt like the house was listening, waiting for me to move. I stayed still for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear more, but the house had gone quiet again. The whisper had been so soft, so faint, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it. But the weight of the air in the room, the chill creeping down my spine, told me otherwise. I needed to know. I slipped out of bed, moving as quietly as I could, careful not to disturb Lily. My feet touched the cold floor, and the chill seeped into my bones as I tiptoed to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I had to see what was out there. The door creaked softly as I opened it, revealing the dark hallway beyond. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the shadows, half expecting to see something waiting for me. But the hallway was empty, bathed in pale moonlight, filtering through the window at the end of the corridor. I stepped out into the hallway, my bare feet making soft sounds on the wooden floor. The air was colder here, heavier, and I could feel the presence of the house pressing down on me from all sides. The second door on the left, it was still cracked open, just like before, and the darkness beyond seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The room was waiting for me. I could feel it. Whatever was inside, it wanted me to come closer. "Come see." The whisper echoed in my mind again, louder this time, more insistent. My body moved on its own, my feet carrying me toward the door, even as every part of me screamed to turn back. I reached the door, my heart hammering in my chest, and with trembling hands, I pushed it open. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house, like all the warmth had been sucked out, leaving only an icy void. The walls were bare, the wooden floor covered in a thin layer of dust, but the air was thick, suffocating, as if it was weighed down by something unseen. I stepped inside, my breath visible in the freezing air. The room felt wrong, like it didn't belong to this house, or this world. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and twist, forming shapes that dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. Then I saw it. At the far end of the room, against the wall, there was a chair. Old, wooden, and worn. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades, untouched. And in that chair sat a figure. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The figure was slumped forward, its face hidden in shadow, its body draped in what looked like an old, tattered blanket. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, staring at me from the darkness. I took a step back, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The room felt alive now, the air thick with a presence that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then the figure shifted. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send a wave of terror crashing through me. The figure slowly raised its head, its face still obscured by shadow, and then, in a voice that was little more than a rasp, it spoke. "Why did you come here?" The voice was old, broken, like it hadn't been used in years. My knees buckled, and I stumbled back, my hand gripping the doorframe to keep myself from falling. The figure stood now, its movements slow, deliberate. The blanket slipped off its shoulders, revealing a body that was impossibly thin, almost skeletal. It took a step toward me, its head tilted slightly, as if trying to see me more clearly. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The figure took another step, and I saw its face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that were hollow and empty, like two dark pits. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its lips were cracked, barely able to form words. "It wants you." The words hung in the air, thick with dread. My mind was spinning, my legs trembling beneath me as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. But the figure kept coming closer, its presence filling the room, suffocating me. Finally, my body reacted, and I turned, sprinting out of the room and down the hallway. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The air around me seemed to vibrate with something dark, something that was chasing me, following me through the house. I burst into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, and my body trembled uncontrollably. Lily stirred in the bed, her eyes blinking open as she sat up, confused. "Hey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice groggy. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. All I could do was shake my head, my back pressed against the door as if something on the other side was trying to push through. But there was nothing, just silence. Lily frowned, her concern growing as she slid out of bed and came over to me. "What happened?" she asked, her hand resting on my arm. "You're shaking. Did you have a nightmare?" I shook my head again, my voice finally returning, though it was weak. "There's someone in the house, in the room." Lily's eyes widened, but before she could respond, we both heard it. A soft creak, barely audible, but it came from the hallway, just beyond the door. Lily turned toward the sound, her face pale. "What was that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew. Suddenly, the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned, slowly at first, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was taking its time. Lily and I stood frozen, our backs pressed against the wall, our breaths shallow as we watched it move. Click. The door creaked open just an inch, letting the cold air from the hallway seep in. I could feel it, the same oppressive presence that had filled the room upstairs, suffocating the air, bending it to its will. Lily reached for my hand, her fingers cold, trembling. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. I didn't have an answer. I wasn't even sure I could speak. The door creaked open wider now, inch by inch, revealing the dark hallway beyond. For a moment, there was nothing, just shadows stretching toward us like fingers, beckoning us into the unknown. But then, something moved. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. My heart sank as I recognized it. The same figure I had seen in the room upstairs. The one with the hollow eyes and the gaunt, skeletal frame. It was standing still, its face obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on us, watching. Lily's grip tightened on my hand. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. I didn't know what to do. My legs felt weak, useless, like they were no longer under my control. The figure didn't move, but its presence filled the entire hallway, pressing down on us like a weight. Then, without warning, it took a step forward. I gasped, pulling Lily closer as we backed away from the door. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, as if it had all the time in the world. It stepped into the moonlight now, and I could see it more clearly. The pale, sunken face, the eyes like dark pits, the thin, almost translucent skin stretched over bones. It took another step, its head tilting slightly as it stared at us. I could hear its breaths now, shallow and rasping, like each inhale was a struggle. My chest tightened with terror. We had to do something. We had to get out of here. Lily grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded, my body finally snapping into action. We bolted toward the bedroom window, pulling it open in a panic. The cold night air rushed in, stinging my skin as we climbed out onto the narrow ledge below. I could feel the figure watching us, could hear the faint rasp of its breath, growing louder as it followed us. We scrambled down the side of the house, landing in the overgrown grass below. My heart was racing, my body shaking from the adrenaline, as we ran toward the car parked in the driveway. The wind howled through the trees, but behind it I could still hear the faint creaking of the floorboards from inside the house. Whatever was in there, it wasn't human. We reached the car, our hands fumbling with the keys in our panic. I threw open the door and practically shoved Lily inside before jumping into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a deafening growl. I didn't look back as we tore down the road, leaving the house behind us, swallowed by the darkness of Winter Ridge. Lily was trembling beside me, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared straight ahead, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Neither of us spoke for a long time. What could we say? How could we explain what had just happened? Finally, after what felt like hours, Lily turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "What was that thing?" I shook my head, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I don't know." But I did know. Deep down, I knew exactly what it was. The house had never wanted us. It had never been ours. We had been intruding, trespassing on something far older, far darker than we could understand. And now, it had revealed itself. Lily's phone buzzed on the seat beside her, cutting through the heavy silence. She picked it up, her hands shaking as she unlocked the screen. "It's the realtor," she said, her voice hollow. "She wants to know if we're settled in." I slammed on the brakes, pulling the car to a stop at the side of the road. "Call her, now." Lily fumbled with the phone, her fingers trembling as she hit the call button. The phone rang twice before the realtor's cheery voice answered on the other end. "Hello. How's the house? Everything going well?" Lily hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "Something's wrong with the house. There's something in there. Someone." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. But then, the realtor's voice came through again, softer this time, more guarded. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice. At least, not right away." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? Lily asked, her voice trembling. "What's in that house?" Another pause. The realtor's voice was different now, distant, almost detached. "It's not the house that's haunted. It's the land. Winter Ridge has history. People disappear. Strange things happen. But the house, it belongs to the Ridge. And now, so do you." Lily dropped the phone, her face pale as she stared at me, her eyes wide with horror. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the car into gear and sped down the road, the trees blurring into dark shapes on either side. The road twisted and turned, but no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that whatever was in the house was following us, waiting for us to make a mistake. Suddenly, the car jerked violently to the side. The steering wheel wrenched from my hands. We veered off the road, the tires screeching as we skidded to a stop in the ditch. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, trying to understand what had happened. But when I glanced at the dashboard, my stomach dropped. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine had died. I turned to Lily, my hands trembling. "What's happening?" She didn't answer. She was staring out the window, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Slowly, I followed her gaze, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the car's headlights, a figure stood. Tall, gaunt, its hollow eyes fixed on us. The Watcher. It had followed us. It had never intended to let us go. I fumbled with the keys, trying to restart the engine, but the car wouldn't respond. The headlights flickered, then went out, plunging us into darkness. And from that darkness, I heard it again. That voice, that whisper. "You shouldn't have left." The darkness closed in around us, thick and impenetrable. The car was dead. The headlights flickered one last time before everything went black. My hands fumbled with the keys, turning them over and over in the ignition. But the engine refused to start. There was nothing but the cold, suffocating silence of Winter Ridge. Lily's breath came in shallow gasps beside me, her eyes locked on the figure at the edge of the trees. The Watcher stood there, motionless, its gaunt frame barely visible in the dim light of the moon. But I could feel it. The air was thick with its presence, pressing down on us, making it hard to breathe. What do we do?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing, spinning with fear and desperation, but I couldn't think straight. I glanced at the dashboard, at the dead keys in my hand, and I knew there was no getting the car to start again. Whatever was out there, whatever had followed us, had taken control. Lily reached for my hand, her fingers icy cold, trembling. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice barely audible. "We have to get away from the car." I nodded, my mouth dry, my throat tight. She was right. The car was a trap now, a cage. We had to move. We stepped out into the cold night air, the wind biting at our skin as we huddled together, trying to stay calm. The Watcher hadn't moved. It just stood there, at the edge of the trees, its hollow eyes locked on us. "We'll run," I said, my voice shaking. "We'll go through the woods. We can get to town, find help." Lily nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. The woods were dark and dense, but they were our only option. We couldn't stay out here, not with that thing watching us. We ran. The trees loomed around us, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers, reaching out to pull us in. The ground was uneven, and every step felt like we were sinking deeper into the woods, the shadows closing in from all sides. The only sound was our ragged breathing, the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath our feet. But I could still feel it. The Watcher was following us. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see it behind us. But the woods were empty, silent. It was like the world had vanished, leaving only the two of us and the endless darkness. We stumbled through the undergrowth, tripping over roots and rocks, our hands scraping against tree trunks as we tried to keep our balance. The cold air burned in my lungs, and my legs felt weak, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. If I did, the watcher would catch up. Lily was ahead of me, her breath coming in quick gasps as she pushed through the branches. But then, suddenly, she stopped. "Wait," she whispered, her voice trembling. I skidded to a halt beside her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it?" Lily pointed ahead, her hand shaking. Through the trees, I could see it. A light, faint and flickering, but unmistakable. A house. For a brief, foolish moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we weren't alone out here. Maybe someone could help us. But as we moved closer, my stomach sank. The light wasn't coming from a house. It was coming from our house. Winter Ridge. How? I whispered, my voice barely audible. We had been running for miles, deeper into the woods, and yet somehow we had circled back. The house stood in front of us, dark and looming, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the night. "We never left," Lily said, her voice hollow with fear. "We never left the ridge." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The Watcher had never intended to let us go. It had led us in circles, back to where it all began. Winter Ridge wasn't just a house. It was something more, something alive, and it had us trapped. "We have to keep going," I said, though my voice was shaking. "We can't stop." But Lily didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, her face pale. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the porch. I followed her gaze, and my blood turned to ice. The door to the house was open. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the faint glow of the porch light, was the Watcher. Its gaunt frame filled the entrance, its hollow eyes fixed on us. It didn't move. It didn't need to. We had been drawn back here, and now there was nowhere left to run. We can't go back in," Lily said, her voice cracking with fear. But there was no other choice. The woods stretched out behind us, endless and impenetrable. The Watcher stood between us and the house, its presence suffocating. But the house was the only place left. "We have to face it," I said, though I barely believed the words. "It won't let us leave until we do." Lily stared at me, her eyes wide, terrified. But after a moment, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." We moved forward, slowly, our feet dragging against the earth as we approached the house. The Watcher didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, like it had been waiting for us all along. As we reached the porch, the air grew colder, thicker, pressing down on us from all sides. My breath came in shallow gasps as we stepped through the open door and into the house. The door slammed shut behind us. The house was dark, colder than it had ever been, the air thick with the weight of something unseen. The Watcher was gone, but its presence lingered, clinging to the walls, to the floors, to the very air we breathed. "Why did we come back?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "What does it want?" I didn't know. All I knew was that the house had been waiting for us. It had always been waiting. Suddenly, the floor beneath us creaked, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The walls groaned, like the house was shifting, settling, and then, from upstairs, we heard it. A voice. Software raspy. Familiar. "Come see." Lily grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. No. We can't." But it was too late. The house had us now, and there was no escape. We climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, pulling us toward the room at the end of the hall. The door was open, just as it had been before, and beyond it, the cold air swirled like a storm, suffocating and thick. We stepped inside. The room was empty, just as it had been before. The same old wooden chair sat in the corner, but this time there was no figure, no watcher, only the silence of the house. And then, slowly, the chair began to creak. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, as the chair rocked forward on its own, as if someone invisible was sitting in it. The air grew colder, the walls seeming to bend and twist, and I could feel the house closing in on us, its dark presence suffocating. Lily backed away, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We need to leave. Now." But I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey. The house had me, and I knew, deep down, that we would never leave. Winter Ridge wasn't a place. It was a trap, and we had walked right into it. The chair rocked again, and this time I saw it. Just a flicker in the corner of my eye. A shadow. A figure. The watcher. It hadn't left. It was here. With us. Watching. Waiting. I turned to Lily, my voice shaking. "Run!" But before she could move, the door slammed shut behind us. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed us whole was the sound of the watcher's whisper, echoing through the house, soft and cold. "You belong to Winter Ridge now."